So Foxhaven is a nonprofit located in Jefferson, Maryland. We're about 15 minutes from Frederick, an hour from Baltimore or DC. And probably, I guess, Elizabeth, are we about 2 hours away from you? Yeah.
Yeah, you sure are. From my home
So,
base, anyway.
Right. So, and you're in York?
I'm in York. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's
York,
my home base.
Yeah. So, yeah, if anyone's calling in from York, we're about 2 hours from York. And Foxhaven offers ecological retreats, classes and events like this one, either online or on the farm. We offer garden tours and tea tastings, beekeeping tours and hive tours, and all kinds of things about herbalism. We grow about 150 different herbs. And throughout the season, we offer an herbal CSA that'll be starting up just now in May, where you can receive fresh herbs. If you are local to either Frederick or Baltimore, we have options for both of those locations. And you can always come and stay on the farm if you're looking just to have a nice place to relax. We have 3 farmhouses that are available for rent for families or work retreats. So we invite you to come and stay with us. That's all I've got to say. Of course, you can find everything on www.foxhavenfarm.org. I'm going to pass it along to our host or speaker today. We have Elizabeth Davidson calling in from Forage Culture, and we're really excited to partner with them for fungi families and a mini hunt. Excited to see what we have in store. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. So I'm really excited to start this out with you guys. So forage culture, so you've heard a little bit about Foxhaven. Foxhaven is absolutely amazing, and really has actually been quite an inspiration for my company. I saw what they were doing for the community in the Frederick area, and I was like, that's absolutely incredible. How can we get more people connected? And so Forage Culture is a company, it's an events and education company centered around wild foods. So we do classes, but a really big thing that we do classes, events, tastings, all kinds of things, but we partner with other like-minded organizations. So we service all of Southern Pennsylvania, as well as the Baltimore area. And we're expanding out more towards Philly, like more towards DC. So yeah, if there's anybody we should get in touch with, let us know. We absolutely love making those connections. So today, guys, we are getting into a little bit of a beginner's mushroom class, which is kind of fun. So I'm curious, type into the chat. I want to know what is the strangest mushroom you guys have eaten. Okay, so it might just be a portobello, and that's absolutely fine, but I just kind of want to get a feel for where you guys are at. So yeah, so this is Forage Culture. If you're talking about that, I'm going to type that into the chat. That is my company, and we do have classes.
Ooh, don't worry, I'll handle the chat, Elizabeth. I'll put it in there for you. You keep going.
You're the best. All right. So I'm seeing a couple things pop up, which is very cool. Oysters. Oh, I love oysters. Oysters you can find both at the market as well as seasonally. Oysters are they're found almost year round, not quite everywhere. Okay. Pheasant back lionfin, nice. These are all wonderful edibles. I highly encourage if you're curious about wild forage mushrooms, go to your farmer's market and go talk to a forager or somebody who actually grows some of these more exotic mushrooms and try some of those first. Now, the reason I'm going to say to do that, okay, because you don't know what your system is going to be able to handle. Okay, so whenever you're encountering a new wild food, there's a couple of rules that you really want to keep in mind. Number one is safety. The second thing is etiquette. And the next thing is laws and liability. So safety is always our number one priority. And today we're not really talking about harvesting them. When you're ready to start learning more about that, I highly encourage you go to a live in-person class, because they're going to be able to discuss things such as private land versus public land, some of those things. But let's talk about safety for a second. So the first time you ever try a new, and we'll just say exotic mushroom, what I want all of you guys to do, put out your hands like this, okay? And then gently close it. However much can fit into your hand right there with your fingers gently closed. That's how much of a new wild food you should eat in a single day. Okay, so what that'll do, and I do mean one, so don't eat, yellow dock for the first time in a soup with a chicken of the woods. Because if you have an upset stomach or something that goes wrong, if you eat two things, you won't know which one it is. And trust me, you do not want to taste those again if you've had like some serious upset. So really try to make sure just one wild food a day, so that way you know what your body can handle. So it is a myth, it is a complete myth when people say that there are some mushrooms that everybody can eat. Okay, so one of the ones that I love pointing out is chicken of the woods. So many people will say, oh, chicken of the woods, yep, perfectly fine and safe for everybody. Well, I happen to have a really, really well-respected forager friend who cannot eat chicken of the woods. It makes her sick as a dog, okay? So I just encourage you guys, take your time with this stuff. So now that that's out of the way, a little bit of safety, let's get into the meat of the material. So I'm going to start a little screen share here. Okay. And I am really excited to be working with Fox Haven. So for today, okay, we are doing a mini hunt, but that doesn't mean we're going to tell you exactly where to go. Right? This is more about giving you enough information to be curious on your own. We're going to start with just how to learn. Right? For many of us, we stopped learning things in a really high intensity level once we got out of grade school, or maybe you did some higher education. For our jobs and our workplace, we learn, but usually it's not quite as intense. Okay, so part of your learning today is going to be a self-graded quiz. Please do not be afraid to get things wrong. Okay, you're going to retain about 10% of what I tell you today through just hearing it and seeing it. And of that 10%, really, I'm going to have to repeat it about 7 times. Forage culture is based on really good teaching. We're not just experts. The biggest thing that we really pride ourselves on is that we know how to present information, okay? So going out on a walk with somebody who's a mushroom expert, that's a totally different style of experience from coming to a class setting, okay? And both are very valuable. I would actually, I would say do all of the experiences because you need that repetition, okay? Now, that being said, okay, we are going to have a little bit of a lecture portion as well to go over some things. We will be highlighting our Foolproof Four, okay? And we'll do a little virtual mini hunt, okay? Just to give you a couple of pointers on where to look in the first place. So again, with repetition, okay, that's how we learn. And we all learn in different ways, okay? Some of us, I'm actually a kinesthetic learner. I've been in the dance world for many, many decades, and that's my main mode of learning. So I have to move. So on the side little square screen, you may see me doing things. Okay, that's just how I am. But I recommend that you have a notebook, because what that's going to do, if you write things down, and I would recommend have a full page or two that are just notes on general mushroom or fungi knowledge, and then for every single mushroom, one designated page in that notebook. So if you don't have a notebook out yet, I would say take a second, grab some scrap sheets of paper, something, but write. That does 2 things. One, that helps you to see something again. And if you're a kinesthetic learner, that helps you to actually get that the feeling in there. Okay. The next thing that you want to do is you want to get outside. Again, you want to read a lot of books. You want to go on walks, go to that marketplace. You want to do all of those things. Okay. Ask a lot of questions. Today, if you guys have questions, put them into the chat. And hopefully we will be able to get to those, maybe not during the presentation today, but hopefully afterwards, if it's something we feel like will be helpful for you guys, okay? Now, another big thing about safety, make sure you're 100% certain of that ID and use 2 to 3 sources, not just one, okay? Last one, please make sure fear is not okay, healthy caution. That is your #1 goal, is to always be very cautious. Okay, but not fearful. All right, we got a quiz. It's a self-graded quiz. Okay, please keep track of your personal score and tell us how you do. Okay, so don't be afraid of getting it wrong. That just means you're going to remember it better. So hopefully this is going to give you an idea of where you're at in your fungi knowledge and teach you some new stuff. First thing, are all mushrooms are watery? True or false? Okay. Does it come in? False. Okay. There's a lot of mushrooms that are actually super meaty and delicious. Okay. They are not all watery. I actually don't like watery mushrooms. So meaty mushrooms would be like shiitakes or your chicken of the woods, things like that. Okay. Now, which of these are part of the fungi kingdom? Strawberries, puffball, old leaves, spear. Take a second, think about it. Answer, puffball, old leaves, because what's going to break down those leaves? Probably some fungi, and beer. Okay, so thank you, fungi, for all of our wonderful intoxicating beverages. Love it. Now, which of these are not a part of the fungi kingdom? Okay, so hopefully the last question helps you to understand this one. So what is not a part of the kingdom? There's only one of them that's on here. Is it mushrooms? Is it bacteria? Is it mold? Or is it yeast? Hopefully you guys are like, I think it's that bacteria. That's not a part of the fungi kingdom. All right, so we just looked at, so mushrooms, so when we say fungi kingdom, right, what are we exploring here? We're talking about the differences between it. Yeah, well, there's more than just these three kingdoms. So we're just going to focus on three. We're talking about the differences between animal, plant, and fungi kingdoms. Because the better we can understand the fungi kingdom, the better we can understand mushrooms, the more easily we can find them on our own. So if we look at this question, we see, okay, mushrooms. Those are the fruiting body of mycelium. We'll talk more about that later. Okay. Bacteria, totally different kingdom. Okay. Mold. We've all seen mold. That's a little fungi. Yeast, that's what we're making our alcoholic beverages. Okay, so all part of that kingdom. Now, all edible wild mushrooms can be eaten raw. True or false? So if you read in a book that it is an edible wild mushroom, is it true or false? You can eat it raw. Very false. Okay, you should cook all wild mushrooms, period, end of story, whether it says edible or not. Okay, not only that, but every single mushroom needs to be cooked in its own way for a certain period of time. So a guidebook many times will tell you some of these pointers, but there's a reason that any mushroomer will tell you have more than one guidebook, because some guidebooks will instruct you and they'll just say, here's the identification. But another guidebook might actually be a little better at, here's how you would cook it. So that's why you want to have multiple sources. Now, edible mushrooms, and we're talking about these wild ones, are safe to eat no matter what they're growing on. True or false? So you find and you identify this mushroom. Does it matter what it's growing on? That is very false. Okay. So there's actually one mushroom in particular that we're going to talk about today where this is very true, and that's chicken of the woods. So chicken of the woods, one of my all-time favorites. If it's growing on the wrong type of tree, it can actually, that's a different species. It looks exactly the same. It will actually produce a toxic chemical that is not very fun to eat. So you do need to know what something is growing on. Edible wild mushrooms can be the following colors: brown, orange, lavender, electric blue, black, white, red, yellow. True or false? Can they be all of these colors? Very true. How crazy is that? So now, I was always told as a child that blue and purple foods were typically very, very toxic in nature and very rare. And they are. but the fungi kingdom has a few. So they are beautiful, so take lots of pictures. Okay. Mushrooms have roots. Oh, I missed my thing on there. True or false? Well, now you know. False. They do not have roots. Okay. They have underground parts that are called hyphae, and they're these little tiny guys that come together to make up mycelium. Okay, we'll discuss that again here momentarily. Mushrooms only consume dead matter. True or false? False. Mushrooms can actually consume living material. And I think we actually all kind of subconsciously know that, but it's good to put it out there. They're like, oh, a mushroom can actually exist on something that is living, okay? Now, which part of a mushroom actually breaks down organic matter? Is it the visible mushroom? Is it the mycelium? Or is it the spores? So which part is actually breaking down organic matter around it? It's your mycelium. So those are kind of the underground portion that you really can't see a ton of. There are some mushrooms that have visible mycelium that we can see quite a bit of. Those are, like, for example, honey mushrooms. Those are a highly destructive mushroom. If you have a forest of any kind, did you see honey mushrooms? That's not a good thing, okay? And you can see their little mycelium everywhere. Now, how do mushrooms reproduce? Is it seeds, spores, asexual reproduction, or rhizomes? I'm specifically talking about mushrooms. The word there was chosen for this reason. So how do they reproduce? Spores, okay? Now this is an incredibly important understanding because those spores, that's essentially the seed portion. That's how they are reproducing. So when we look at a fungi as an entire thing, it has its below ground part and it has the above ground part. The above ground part is what they call the fruit body. That's the mushroom. That's the part that you see. And a fruit carries seeds. That's what it's supposed to do. It doesn't last very long. It's really delicious, right? It's very attractive to all sorts of different things so that it can reproduce everywhere, right? And that's what a mushroom does. A mushroom is just a little short-lived thing. It's really not the main part of a fungi, okay? Now, you do, as you continue your mushroom journey, which hopefully you'll be taking more classes and more walks, and you'll be continuing your education, you always need to look for where the spores are coming from. That's actually a big part of identification. Now, which of these are not a part of any mushroom? Is it pores, gills, cap, or ribs? Which of these does not belong? Ribs. Okay. One of my friends is like, she was super shocked. She's like, oh my gosh, mushrooms have pores? And they do. So you want to get used to just hearing some of the language of describing them. Gills, false gills, a cap, right? So that's the way that they describe kind of the top part of the mushroom. But it's always good to kind of get just used to some of that language. Okay. Now, what features are shared by the fungi and the animal kingdom? Is it the ability to synthesize vitamin D? Is it that they can't use sunlight as an energy source? Is it that they don't have cell walls, or is it both A and B? And I'll tell you, it is actually both A and B. Both animal kingdom and the fungi kingdom can synthesize vitamin D, and we cannot use sunlight as an energy source. Okay, so there's a lot of similarities there. Now, did you learn something new? Okay, hopefully, right? So that's a real broad overview quiz, okay? Send me in the chat box. How do you feel like you did? Did you fail the test entirely? Did you get a couple of them right, or are you the quiz master? You know, kind of give yourself a little ranking there and let me know how you felt like you did on that. Okay. Now, I will say the fungi kingdom in general, we do talk about how we have a lot more similarities with the animal kingdom and the fungi kingdom. But when you are thinking about mushrooms, I really want you to think about them like fruit. Okay, it needs certain conditions. Fruit needs water and light. It needs very specific things in order to come about. Okay, so that's the same exact kind of idea when you're thinking about mushrooms. Oh, nice. Okay, so we got a couple people that are like, all right, I feel like I did all right. Okay, very cool. Now, this is called fungi families, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be categorizing mushrooms based on what do they like to eat, essentially. Okay, this particular class is not a taxonomy class. This is not a true identification class. That is a much more intensive process. And I mean, this is a huge book, right? To go through all the different types of mushrooms that you might find takes quite some time. This is a good primer. And if you feel like a lot of these things are familiar to you, good, because that is what you want to feel before you go out onto a mushroom hunt. You want to feel confident.
Is that a book that you recommend?
Okay.
What's the title
Now,
of that?
Absolutely. And I do have a slide a little later on that has it in there. There's actually two that I highly recommend. So I'm a visual learner. Again, I think that's the dancer in me, and I'll hold them both up. But like I said, I have them later. Both of these books have pictures in them, which I highly recommend. Now, neither one of them is great for cooking per se. I'll give you a little outline, so the cooking part's tough. Now, if you are looking for specific hands-on fungi ID, we actually do host those classes with actual specimens of mushrooms and sensory items such as smell and touch items, so that you can get more familiar with some of the language. I do not run those. Those are actually run by some really, really amazing mycologists. Okay, so animal kingdom, let's talk about it for a second. You guys are like, why is there a picture of a hand on a light bulb? Well, I'll get there in a second. So let's talk about us first, then we can understand the fungi kingdom. We eat things that are around us. Of course, we break them down, we eat them, and then our stomach breaks it down. We have walls. We actually have cell walls. We move around to get our food, and we can communicate in a variety of different ways. Pheromones, of course, chemicals, verbal language, and electricity. So we, at a neural level, now that electricity doesn't actually extend outside of our body, but it's pretty cool. The plant kingdom, okay, they get their energy through photosynthesis. Now they gather other nutrients and water through the roots, but their main energy source is the sun. Okay, they have cell walls, stationary, and they also communicate through different pheromones, volatile organic compounds, and a little bit of electricity within their cells, which is pretty crazy. And hopefully most of you guys know that plants and fungi, they really have a symbiotic relationship in order to create underground communication, which is fascinating. Now the fungi kingdom, okay, they're just like us. We eat organic matter, and they use, just like us, enzymes to break things down. But the difference is that they secrete these enzymes, and they have no cell walls. So they're absorbing things constantly through those mycelium, which is really, really phenomenal. They also communicate through chemical exchanges and pheromones, okay, and electrical signals. And if you really want to hear something cool, look up online where they take these two electrodes and they hook it up to a mushroom, and you can actually hear the electrical waves coming out of various mushrooms. And you can, it's like whale song or something. It's very bizarre. But mushrooms and fungi are extremely difficult to study because that mycelium is not connected. Mycelium and hyphae can actually have spaces in between them because they communicate through these different chemical and electrical exchanges. They actually don't have to be connected. And that's part of the reason why they are so fundamental to connecting plants, trees, and everything like that underground, because they do not require direct touch in order to communicate. So that is a big part that makes them quite fascinating. Now, the mycelium are their little underground network that are made up of hyphae. Okay, they do not have cell walls. And again, mushrooms, we want to think of those as fruit, and they have spores. That's how they multiply. All right, so let's talk just a little bit about different groupings of our mushrooms. And I know this looks like quite a bit of material, but again, I hope you're writing some of these things down. This is a very, to to a good, broad, general understanding of how to actually find certain mushrooms, you need to understand how they're breaking down that organic material and what organic material they want to have. So there are four general types of mushrooms that we're going to kind of cover today. And you've got a parasitic style, right? So when we think about a parasite is not very friendly. It's leaching resources from a host, and it does typically damage that host, which kind of is not a great thing. Now, without a host, a parasite cannot live, grow, or multiply. So for this reason, a parasite rarely kills its host, but that's not true in the fungi kingdom, okay? So some examples of that would be, I already talked about it, but the honey mushroom, which is an edible mushroom. It is not a beginner's mushroom. It can be quite tricky to identify correctly, but that honey mushroom is a parasite on trees, on your good, beautiful old hardwoods, and it will kill them. Okay, Candida yeast, which is found naturally in our bodies, okay, is actually a parasite when it's given certain conditions. Cordyceps mushrooms, those actually are parasitic to insects. So, little fun fact for you there. So cordyceps are known as a medicinal mushroom. They're not really a choice edible, but it's interesting to learn. Now, the saprophytic mushrooms, those are the ones that we're really going to be looking at and studying today. Okay, those make up the majority of our really tasty edible mushrooms, and you find those on decaying matter. So saprophytic means that it feeds on already dead material. Now, it can form symbiotic relationships in nature, okay, and some saprophytic mushrooms are also considered mildly parasitic, depending on the situation. So there is some overlap in there. So for example, chicken of the woods, that's a saprophytic mushroom, and morel mushrooms, which is literally the season, like I heard, starting today. So it's very exciting. All right, now mycorrhizal mushrooms, those are mushrooms that create truly symbiotic relationships, okay, with an external, usually a tree. So we think of those as really being a relationship between the mushroom and the roots of a tree. So of course, everybody's thinking, oh, truffles. Absolutely, okay? And you will not find truffles unless you have certain trees, certain soil conditions, things like that. So if the trees don't exist, the mushrooms won't exist. So again, this is where, depending on what you're looking for, you need to understand, what does it like to eat? What are the relationships it likes to have? Okay. Now, these relationships, what ends up happening is that the mushrooms are exchanging certain nutrients and water through the roots of the tree for other nutrients that that particular mushroom cannot get because it's not above ground or because of where it's at. Boletes, in general, have some of these relationships, but boletes are those are a whole different set of mushrooms that can be quite tricky. So we're not even going to cover those today. Now, the last one is endophytic. Now, we aren't actually looking for them, but it's interesting to talk about because this is a symbiotic relationship that is internal of a host. So plants everywhere, coffee plants, eggplants, cucumber plants, they all have little tiny fungi living inside of them that are these little happy relationships, and they're just working back and forth with each other, okay? So, but just to put it out there. All right. The Foolproof Four. Okay, I hope you guys are excited because, well, actually, where's my little book? Here we go. Okay, so I have this wonderful Peterson field guide to edible wild plants. I love this book. You can tell it's very worn. It's got lots of, dimpled pages. And in here, I remember when I was first reading about mushrooms, and I was like, oh, great, there's 4 mushrooms that are perfectly safe. And that is not true. And I get really frustrated every time I read about that because it is incredibly misleading. Healthy caution is very, very good. And the problem a lot of times with these guides that do put out there, the Foolproof Four, is that they're not actually giving you enough information about the things that look similar. So a total beginner with mushrooms sees this and erroneously will think, oh, if this is safe, there must not be anything that looks similar to it. That is not true. So that's what we're going to talk about first today, because many of these mushrooms, the reason they're called the Foolproof Four is because you can find them in a huge variety of places, and for some of them, in a wide variety of seasons. Okay, so let's take a look, okay, at what they are. So first thing you might notice is that there's not 4 on here. There's 5. So that's the first problem with the Foolproof Four, is that nobody can agree on what those 4 are, okay, because it's not really founded in any fact, okay. So these mushrooms, and we are going to talk about all of them, are the giant puffball, chicken of the woods, shaggy mane, chanterelles, and morels. Now, as much as I hate's a strong word, I don't like using that, dislike that name Foolproof Four, what I do really appreciate about this particular grouping is that it helps people to start understanding a wide variety of mushroom shapes and where mushrooms might be growing. So it is giving you an excellent foundation without feeling like it overwhelms you. You know, think about how many different types of plants there are in the world. If you tried to learn and find all of them all at once, you would just stop, and that's no fun. So, you know, what people have done is they've tried to group together a couple of mushrooms that are really delicious, and all of these they're really delicious. They are found widely, and it gives you a great introduction to some of the types of mushrooms that you can find. So let's start with the shaggy mane. Now, shaggy mane, I'm going to start off with this one. Most of you guys said that you're kind of from the Northeast area, and really we don't find the shaggy mane too much in our area. So when you look at guidebooks that are more so for the Northeast or our space, you may not even see this one listed, but it's worthwhile to talk about because, you know, one of the fun things about being a mushroom hunter is not just hunting in your area. It's about, you know, you take a trip, maybe somebody's getting married on the other side of the country. So you take a trip, and you know what? It happens to be, you know, kind of in that springtime when you're like, oh, I think morels might be out. And you know, oh, I remember I took this class, and on the West Coast, the burned areas can sometimes be really good for the type of morels that grow there. Great. Well, now you're going to have something fun to do as you take an extra day for a hike. So mushroom hunting is a wonderful hobby, and I really think it's a good idea here to talk about the shaggy mane because it is known as one of the wonderful delectables. It is fairly easy to recognize. Okay, it has these little scaly, wispy things on the edges, and it's got this cute little round egg shape on top, and it does have a stalk. Okay, now what we're looking for is that egg shape. Okay, this guy, I mean, I've seen pictures pop up where people have a whole yard full of shaggy mane. Okay, and they're like, what do I do with this? And everybody's like, pick it, eat it. No. Okay, shaggy mane does not last very long. Okay, and it does grow in these disturbed spaces, usually where people have been. And you're going to find that there's really two main places that you look for mushrooms. It's either really beautiful old hardwood damp forests, or you're looking for disturbed areas. And when we say disturbed areas, we mean that the deep soil where our deep mycorrhizal connections are, mycelium connections are, that if those have been disturbed, you're not going to get mushrooms. Okay, so the lawn, okay, you cut the grass, maybe you aerate it, but all those mycelia are still intact. So that's why you can have mushrooms that pop up in your lawn year after year after year, because that's, you know, that's what they're living on. I found them in my raspberries. Yep. Oh, that's great. Okay, now these guys are more a fall mushroom. Okay, so right now would not be the time. Okay, but what you can do in the meantime is learn, okay, about one of the mushrooms that looks very, very similar, okay? And that would be your destroying angel. Okay, so the destroying angel, what you see here, and actually let me start first with the shaggy mane. The reason I said get it early, so this is an open shaggy mane cap. You can see how it's turning black on the edges. It is decaying, and they decay rapidly. So like as soon as you cut them off from the base, you want to eat them like ASAP within a day or two. Otherwise, they'll just turn into black sludge. It's pretty gross. Okay. Okay. Now on the right-hand side, you'll see the destroying angel. Okay, which it can kill you after a single mushroom, and in its very young stages. I'm just going to go back here for a second. If you're not careful, okay, maybe that destroying angel has some dirt or something on it like that, or it's growing near your shaggy mane, something like that. Again, it's just a good idea to know that is a bad thing. Now, this is a baby. When the destroying angel gets larger, it is pure white. Okay, it gets very, very large. The cap opens up like a beautiful umbrella, and it has what's called a little veil. I call it a tutu, okay, because that's what it looks like to me, and I'm a dancer. It looks like it has just a little skirt on the stalk. Okay, so that's just a little warning. Again, in your guidebook, when you guys are going back through this, you're going to look at the mushrooms that you want to find, and then you're going to relook up some of these lookalikes, and you're going to learn them. All right, next is the giant puffball. Okay.
Sorry, I had a quick question on shaggy mane. What do they taste like? Do they taste like licorice?
I'm not sure. I would have to double check that. I've actually never eaten one. It's on my hunt list. I'm hoping to find some later in the year, but I'll look it up and I'll get back to you.
Great.
All right. So giant puffball. So the giant puffball is absolutely delicious as a pizza crust. So I eat a lot of gluten-free items. And what you do is when you find this guy, and he's huge, like, so spread out your hand, okay? That's how big it should be, if not bigger, okay? So, 8 inches to 16. I mean, I've seen people who, they weigh pounds, okay? So they're great, but you do need to know some of the identifying features. So when you cut it in the middle, and that's it, you must do that with every single puffball. Just trust me on this, cut it down the middle, okay? Reason being, we said earlier that you want to look for the spore surface. Well, this is a big round ball and it's growing straight from the dirt. Where are the spores? Okay, let's call it a puffball for a reason, because what happens is that as it ages, the spores are actually inside. So what happens, and I'll show you on the slide on the next page, okay? If you look at the picture all the way on the far right of the screen, there's a little brown dot, and that'll actually start becoming a pore surface. But let me come back to this one, okay? So you want it to be completely pure white when you cut it down the middle. So you can see pure white and creamy. There is essentially, I call it a rind. I know people don't call it, they call it a skin, but it feels like a rind to me. It's a little tougher, it's a little bit thicker, and you should feel like you have to cut through that. But that's the part that can be a little bit confusing. Now this guy, he pops up everywhere, okay? So my dad has a vineyard, and I was so mad at my dad. I was so mad because he was like, oh, I think I saw about, 20 to 30 of those guys, but, so I kicked them all down. I was like, what? You didn't keep them for me? Okay, because they'll last, they will keep very mild flavor. You can chunk them up, slice them into crust, that sort of thing. Now let's talk about the lookalikes here, is the poison pigskin puffball. Now, a puffball can start turning slightly brown on the outside. It can start getting little scales, but still be very white and still edible on the inside. Because remember, it kind of has that outside skin. So the poison pigskin looks very, very similar. Okay, and when you cut into it, okay, it will be pure white, but you're going to see a much more defined layer on the outside of that poison pigskin. Okay, and there will be more defined scales on the outside. So that's what you want to be careful of. So that's why, with the puffballs, it's got to be white, pure white. Okay, and you can see kind of in that far picture, that's a discolored puffball mushroom where he's too far to eat. He's already starting to create spores. Chanterelles. Okay, so we're getting into some of the really delicious, delectable ones. Chanterelle, you can see that picture where the chanterelle is being held. It's a great photo where you can really see the false gills. They go all the way from the outer edge all the way down, and you can see it's a beautiful trumpet-like shape. It'll have a faint apricot or a peachy smell. Not all of them have that peppery flavor when you chew them when they're raw, but some do. Now, we discussed you shouldn't eat a raw wild mushroom. However, one part of IDing a mushroom can actually be taste. Now, tasting something does not mean ingestion. Tasting, like a wine tasting, you swish it around or you chew or whatever, and then you do spit it out. And that's actually part of fungi identification. Now, our chanterelles, many times you're going to find those in rich, disturbed soils, hardwoods, like, you want to look for oak trees. You can find some mixed hardwood and conifers. So one of the host sites that we teach our classes on, it's got beautiful open land because they have horses, and of course, horse manure is actually really good for mushrooms. And they also have this amazing hillside with tons of oak trees, and there's just chanterelles that come up every year. They're beautiful, big old guys. Now, the top picture here, if you look at kind of like on the very top one, those are some older chanterelles. If you see those, you want to say, I should come back here, because they will come back. Okay. Now, you're going to find them growing by themselves in pairs, sometimes scattered around, and they really are lovely looking. They're one of the best mushrooms. Let me step back. Not every mushroom can be dried well. So, for example, the giant puffball tends to do better frozen than it does actually dried. So there are differences between that. Now, the lookalike is a jack-o'-lantern. Now, the chanterelle is going to be going directly from the ground. So remember, we talked about it's so important to understand what is a particular mushroom eating? What does it need for energy and for sustenance? The jack-o'-lantern, also known as the vomiter, even though ingestion will not just cause a one-way flood, it will be both ways, and it is bad. So the jack-o'-lantern is growing on wood. What's tricky, and I love this picture. This was actually sent to me by a friend, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I went on a walk in the woods. Can I eat these?" And I immediately was like, "No, please don't eat them." So it looks like those are growing from the ground, and they're not. So with a mushroom, one of the important things about gathering them is that you want to make sure you actually have a trowel, never cut them off of the base, dig below the base, get down into the ground and see what's actually growing on. Because if we did dig down, we would see that this is growing on either roots, a thick rootstock that's down there, a piece of wood that maybe got lodged under the soil, something like that. Okay. Now those jack-o'-lanterns, if we look at the top, they're much more broad. The gill shape is different as well. Okay. So again, get that guidebook so you can say, what are the differences between these? Now, chicken of the woods is my favorite wild mushroom. So it's a polypore, which means it doesn't have the stalk and the cap to it. So polypore, these have little shelves, okay? So these remind me of like frilly ruffles, right? So like dresses with layers and layers and layers of skirts, okay? So that's what they look like to me, and I just think they're absolutely stunning. I could take pictures of them for years and never get tired. They do grow directly from a tree. Okay, and they are growing on dead trees, so moist dead trees, old dead trees. You can actually see in the photo, there's moss and other things, other living organisms are breaking down the tree. Okay, they are a bright orange and yellow. They can be a little bit more white. On the underside, you should see either white or actually a very, very bright yellow. Okay, so they can be both colors, both are correct. Now, what to look out for is please do not eat chicken of the woods that is growing on any kind of a coniferous tree. So anything, if you're in a mixed forest, you've got to be really careful. So what tends to happen is that with chicken of the woods, you can see all of these photos are very, very, very old degraded trees. So it can be tough to actually identify what kind of a tree that is. So that's where it gets really tricky with chicken of the woods. Now, the reason we say to be careful is that the ones growing on your coniferous trees are actually different species, and they can actually be a little bit toxic. So do be careful about that. And then the last picture over on the side there is just an older chicken of the woods. So you can see it's lost its bright color. It looks so sad over there. So that's not a good one to eat, but it will flush again. So actually, let me take you back. I didn't show you. So the little tiny guy there, that's a little baby mushroom. He's a little nub. And what's great about him, you just leave him there for like 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 2 at most, okay? And he'll get huge. He will grow. And when you're harvesting chicken of the woods, you can actually give yourself a really prolonged season by harvesting just a portion and leave portions of that chicken, and it'll keep regrowing. Now, most people will tell you chicken of the woods is more of a late summer and fall, but it just depends on where you are. I have friends in Tennessee who found chicken of the woods a month ago. So you kind of have to just keep your eye on it. So if you've got a spot, keep checking it. All right, and the last of our major mushroom topics today is going to be morels. Okay, they are so beautiful. They are, in my opinion, the second most photographable mushroom. I think chicken of the woods is, because I love color. Okay, but morels are just fascinating. They have a very honeycombed texture. So look, I really want you guys to take a look at what we mean by honeycomb. Could a bunch of bees funnel themselves in there? Are they deep? And that's actually the spore surface, okay, for our morels. So again, we're talking about identification. What are we looking for? So that's where we see it. I didn't mention that on chicken of the woods, the underside, and this is typical with most polypores, the underside is the pore surface. So we're looking at these morels, and they can range from a pale blonde to a deep brown. They can grow, by themselves. They can grow with a friend. They can grow with 3 friends. They can also grow scattered everywhere. They're a little bit playful. Okay. They do grow directly from the ground, and they love ash trees. Which ash trees I've been really trying to learn them this year. I'm much better with tulip poplars. That's where I found all of my morels, is with old tulip poplars, like dead tulip poplars. Dead elms are also a good one to find them on, and of course springtime. So in our particular area, I've been watching fervently. Morels are finally popping up. They're a little late this year, but hopefully you guys will feel like, I know where some tulip poplars are, because those flowers are always really annoying, or whatever it is. Okay. Now, things to look out for: the false morel. So when a morel is young, and there are morels that do look similar to this. This is not a fully comprehensive guide to everything, but there are morels that are called half morels. Okay, which is an edible morel. But what we're looking at right now is the top, which looks a little bit folded. So no honeycomb. But there are people who will see this and say, oh, that looks similar to my half morel, and they'll eat it. And that's really dangerous. Now, some books will tell you that, yes, you can eat a false morel, but you have to prepare it in the right way, which involves dehydration, rehydration, and cooking for an extended period of time. And even doing that, you still might have some toxicity to it. So until you get more comfortable, I would say really try to stick with the true honeycomb, or get a book that actually lists, I believe there's, don't quote me on this, but maybe there's 8 different species of morels that grow in this area, 18 across North America. So there's quite a few. So there are a lot of variations. All right, so are you guys ready to start scouring? How do we learn? Repetition. You got to hear something. How many times? 7. Okay. And how much are you going to retain? 10%. All right. So that being said, hopefully you guys have been writing everything down. Okay. Because what's going to happen is, now that you've written down, these are the cliff notes of these things. What's going to happen? You guys are going to get some guidebooks. Okay. And how many are you going to get? At least 2. Because you're going to make sure that when you get your mushrooms, okay, and mushrooms are not like plants. Mushrooms, you can harvest them, keep each individual mushroom separate, okay, and you do need to do a separate ID on every mushroom that you get, okay. With plants, there are some plants that you really don't want to touch because they can cause extreme dermatitis if you're not careful. But this is not a plants class. If you want to do plants, come walk with me and we'll talk about safety for those, okay. But with mushrooms, get yourself at least 2 books, and I mean good books, not general ones, okay. So, and you guys will have this list. All right, now we are going to have a couple things. We did not get any videos in this one. This format does not allow this, okay. But please understand, the pictures that we're going to go through, these are not to give you an exact. This is not about, oh yeah, look at this mushroom here. That doesn't really help you guys. I can show you mushrooms for days, but if you don't understand where to look on your own, you're never going to find them, okay? So this is about you guys understanding what's good, and you know what? You walk into a place and you're like, no, this isn't going to work, okay? So first of all, you need to watch your weather. I would highly recommend, if you are into morels, you need to follow thegreatmorel.com, morel sightings, and it will tell you where the sightings have been and weather. Okay, it's a great resource. So for morels, soil temperatures do need to be above 50 degrees, and it needs to be a nice gradual increase. Up and down has kind of been, that's what people are thinking is why they're not really popping up. And you do need to have enough rainfall. That's been the other kind of downer. So we really haven't had enough rain. Last year, so at this point in the time last year, in general, there was about 8 inches of rainfall, 8 inches more of rainfall. That's quite a bit. Okay, so 2020 was an extraordinary mushrooming year. All right, guys, so first things first, you need to know your trees, okay? Look at these beauties. Look how big they are. Okay, so on the left-hand side, that one is a giant oak tree. He's clearly been there for a long time. And look at that diameter of the one on the right-hand side. And the one on the right-hand side actually has 2 different types of mushrooms. It has an old hen of the woods, maitake, and some beefsteak mushrooms growing up higher. So when you get these really old trees, they start breaking down. And remember, different mushrooms can be slightly parasitic. So you have a tree that's still alive on some portion, but maybe some portions are dead, vice versa. That's what you want to look for, and not just one. Mushrooms like to be in forests, okay? Specifically when we're talking about, you know, if it says look for oak trees, they don't just mean 1 or 2, usually it's several. Now, look for the water. So in these photos, you can see there's a slope. Okay, so and it's a fairly steep slope. Well, what does that mean? That's where the water is going to run. So the fruiting body. So again, we talked about how mushrooms are really the fruit. Okay, they are primarily composed of water, even though they aren't all watery. So they do need quite a bit of hydration in order to exist. So a lot of times, mushroomers you'll see them digging in the soil looking for the dampness. Okay. And also looking on slopes. So what you're seeing right here, the middle picture is actually a slope that I was scouting earlier late last fall, where a tulip poplar had died, and there used to be a couple of them, and it's pretty damp. And this spring, that's where I found my morels. So if you see rocky and dry clay soils, don't expect to see mushrooms. Okay, unless you see some really, again, if you can see where the water's running down, that's your exception. Okay, so what I want everybody to do, look real close at your screen on the left-hand side. Okay, what are we looking for? We're looking for a morel, and they are zoomed in on the right-hand side. They are very difficult to see. So different mushrooms need different techniques, okay? So chanterelles, it's like, oh, well, they're bright orange. Those should be fairly easy. Not necessarily, because where do they like to grow? They like to grow around oak trees. Oak leaves don't tend to disintegrate. They actually will stay. That's why even right now, before the trees have come out, the ground is covered with oak leaves still, because they don't actually disintegrate. So where are these chanterelles coming up? Underneath of them. So what you want to train your eye for are little characteristics and slight color variations. Now, most of the time when people are looking for morels, if you were just walking across, that might be extremely difficult to actually see. So what a lot of morel hunters do is they look for their trees, they look for damp spaces, places where they might occur, and then they get down on their hands and knees. So what I would actually recommend, if you want to be a really good morel hunter, get yourself some knee pads. Okay, some good gardening knee pads, something like that. And what you do is you get some baggy pants and slide your knee pads underneath so that you don't feel like you look stupid. And then everywhere you go, you just start hunting. And it's actually the same thing for chanterelles, okay? Especially if you're looking in those hardwood areas. Know your plants. So from left to right, you have wild ginger. Please don't harvest that one, okay? It doesn't grow very fast. And then in the middle, you have baby jewelweed. Okay, which is delicious. It's absolutely wonderful. It does not keep, so you have to eat it fresh. And then on that far right, you see moss. Now that is moss from over winter. So it's not really alive yet, but what does that tell us? It tells us that the soil is damp and has some loaminess to it. And that's where mushrooms also like to grow. So all of these plants tend to like to grow in this area. Look for decaying wood. Right? So if I see a wood chip pile that looks brand new, probably not going to have mushrooms unless you took some spores and you put them on there, which I highly encourage. Wine caps, wine caps actually come out before the morels. Wine caps can be cultivated and they are a spring mushroom. They're wonderful. Okay, but both of these, the middle and the last wood piles, I'm not even going to bother. Okay. In the middle picture, you can actually see in the background, there's another wood pile, but even that, the wood is very, very thin around. I wouldn't expect to find a bunch of mushrooms there. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. Old, rotting. The picture on the left is actually in a stream, and you can see plants are actually growing up and out of it. We can see water trickling down. And on the right-hand side, I see a huge variety of mushrooms, which tells me, okay, so I see all these different kinds of polypores on here. There's actually 3 different types in this one area. There's probably a good environment for mushrooms here, so just keep coming back. So, same thing. Look for where people disturb. So we talked about disturbed areas, especially for the puffballs. So on the far left-hand side, okay, that is actually a vineyard. And right in the middle of the rows, right where it had been cleared off around the vines, that's where the puffball mushrooms started growing. The picture on the far right is actually a little mini puffball. He is edible, and that was found in the middle of a trail. So again, it's just where people are shuffling around. So 2 quick things before I leave you guys tonight. I feel like I did a really good job of keeping this short and sweet. Please, please, please be careful. So anytime I see a hole in a piece of wood like this, or in the ground or anything like that, you have got to be careful because that is where creatures live. All right. Dead wood, which is where we find our mushrooms, is also a great home and a habitat. Not only that, but especially this year. So one of the big things that we have going on, we do have cicadas coming out, and it's not just the cicadas that are going to be booming. What eats cicadas? Because you have to think there's always a chain effect in nature. Snakes, they eat cicadas. So guess what? We're going to have a lot more snakes this year. So you guys, as you're walking through the woods, I highly recommend make a lot of noise. Shuffle the leaves around a ton, carry a stick. I see people, it kills me when somebody's like, you know, you look young, you don't need a walking stick. I'm like, I don't care. I'm looking for mushrooms. I don't want to get bit or stung or anything. So I make a lot of noise. That's what I do. This is a technique that my dad actually taught me in order to wander around the woods safely, especially as a woman. So we do have hunters in our area, so that does help as well. When you make a lot of noise, people are like, huh, what is that? Oh, that's a human being. Okay. So the next thing is do be aware of widowmakers on our windy days. Widowmakers are trees that are dead or dying that can fall down. I usually see at least one post a year somewhere where somebody has unfortunately actually died from a widowmaker. Okay, so that is a very real saying, as a mushroom hunter, we tend to be looking at the ground. Foragers tend to look at the ground. So make sure, get your eyes up, do look for those. And then the last thing, guys, just be aware as the summer months continue, as you're looking at the ground as well, be aware for any flying insects, bees, things like that, because they will come after you. So I just wanted to make sure to put out a couple of safety tips there for everybody. Those are things I always think about, because I want you guys to have fun, and I want you to do this for a really long time. And I want you to go out and find a bunch of morels. Keep your eyes open for some of this wine cups, and wood ears would be what you're looking for right now. So on that, we are concluding our little presentation on our fungi families and mini hunt. Again, I was so happy to be able to work with Foxhaven. And if you guys have any other questions, I see book titles. So we'll make sure to get that sent out to you guys. I'll make sure it's like in a follow-up email or something like that for everybody.
Can you just go back to that slide that you had real quick?
Yes, I can. If you want to write it down.
Yeah,
here we go.
There we go. Perfect.
My pleasure.
Awesome. And we can stick around for a couple of minutes if you have any follow-up questions or anything like that. We've been answering them as we go along.
And I will tell you, like, I am the first to tell you, if I don't know something 100%, I will tell you that. And I will write it down and I will find out. So
every good teacher should do that. Absolutely.
That's how I feel. Can't know everything.
Here's a question. What was the first plant you mentioned that would be in wet, loamy areas?
Oh, wild ginger. You can also look for ferns. Ferns are a really, really easy one to look for, especially right now, because they're so pretty with their little tendrils coming up. So that's a good one to keep your eye open.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, well, we will be sending out this recording. So if you have any further questions, we'll also have the contact information for both of us, and we can work to get those answers for you. But this concludes our evening. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope you have a really great mushroom hunting season.
Yep. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you. Take care.